Well, good morning, everyone. We're happy that you could join us today for another webinar presented by the Phoenix Philanthropy Group, and we're delighted to have the Aspen Leadership Group, a close partner of ours, with us here today. We're talking about what I wish I'd known as in my first VP or Chief Development Officer role, and all of us who were a part of the panel, or Gregory and I as moderators, have all gone through that process with some successes and undoubtedly some challenges, and we wanted to share those with you today and help you as you are looking at or have recently stepped into such a role. And as we know, when you step into your Chief Advancement Officer, Chief Development Officer role, Vice President role, sometimes it's very successful. You know, it's great, and as we work with our clients, to see people who are jumping into it, and they've obviously prepared for this for years and years. And when they get on board and they're in that position of leadership, you can just see that they are unleashing kind of all of the ideas that they've had about this position over a number of years. In other cases, however, it can be a little rough, and there might be a pretty extensive learning curve of understanding the difference in roles and responsibilities, in essence, maybe going from a specialist to a generalist. We're going to address all those issues today, and we have a terrific panel who is going to speak to that. We will first, Gregory from Aspen Leadership Group and I have a couple of comments at the beginning. I'll turn it to Gregory, and then we'll come back and we will introduce our panel in just a little bit. So Gregory.
Great, thanks, Richard. It's really wonderful to see everybody here this morning virtually. One of the, I think, of the outcomes of the pandemic that really helped us all was realizing we could do so much together without having to be together physically. And one of the silver linings of a tragic time in many ways, but it's good to have everybody here this morning. And as Richard mentioned, Phoenix Philanthropy Group is a strong partner with Aspen Leadership Group, and we look for opportunities to collaborate and try to help our profession and the folks who have come into leadership roles, like everybody in this group who either might be there now or is looking to potentially move into those ranks in the not too distant future. But one of the things that we notice about this work when one does move into these leadership roles is the shift in the scope of responsibilities that we face. And it's a pretty profound shift from working with teams and trying to manage and motivate and inspire and provide leadership to working with a very different kind of audience that can have a lot of influence on the role in ways that you're not necessarily accustomed to. But the skills that you mastered during your time moving through the ranks and developing those skills and deepening those skills are not always the ones that serve you the best or are the most relevant to the role that you might have as you move into the VP or CDO role. Richard, I'll turn it back to you for introductions.
All right. Well, our panel today is Jason Geiken, who is the Vice President of Advancement at Arkansas Tech University, Mike Remedi, who is the Chief Development Officer at the Desert Botanical Garden in Arizona, and Kimberly Valentine, who's the Chief Development Officer of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation in Arizona and Wisconsin. And we'll be hearing from them in a little bit, and we're really excited to have them joining us today. In the material sent in advance of this webinar, you got their bios, so I'm not going to repeat that. And I am going to ask them to give us detail on their current positions and their background. So we'll get to that to just in 1 minute. As I look at what I consider an ideal Chief Development Officer or an ideal Vice President of Institutional Advancement at a university or another major nonprofit, I think that the skill sets are both internal and external. In terms of internal responsibility, it's knowledge of the annual fund, major gifts, planned or legacy giving. It's understanding fundraising communications, advancement operations, how to manage people, processes, and functions, both up, down, and out. It is being a part of the executive leadership team and being a staff officer to the CEO and the board of directors, all while maintaining a portfolio of high potential prospects and donors. There's also an external role, obviously, and that is a role that you play with confidence and gravitas, because there will be times as a chief development officer or a vice president of advancement needs to be the face and the voice of the organization. You're the one out there representing the organization on behalf of the president, on behalf of your fellow executive leadership team members, on behalf of the board. So it needs to be a strong leader and articulate spokesperson for the organization. But it also needs to be somebody who doesn't have such an ego that if their job is just to, frankly, carry the briefcase for the president or fade into the woodwork, that's a problem. So that's a combination of skill sets that is really what I think is extensive. And I think it breeds good success in these roles, but it's hard to find in one person all the time. So how do you adapt your skill sets to be able to play all those different functions? With that, I'll just quickly turn it back to Gregory, and then we'll get into our questions with our panel.
Richard did a beautiful job sort of outlining those different buckets of responsibilities, those different categories of internal and external. And of course, I agree with all of that. It's quite accurate. But making that actual transition and stepping into that role of being the CDO often means that you have to make that transition and push yourself to those skills very quickly. There's not necessarily a long ramp up once you're in the role. You've got to step in and exude that confidence you talked about and be able to demonstrate competence so that your colleagues and your peers and the board that you will probably be working with much more directly can have confidence in you as the right person in that role. You have to learn to listen very carefully and respectfully with your new constituencies. Again, oftentimes the board is one of the most dominant ones. You've got to exert maybe a new level of diplomacy and sometimes even neutrality as you're engaging with those different kinds of constituents. And you also have to be able to manage expectations when many of those new stakeholders that you're now dealing with feel that they're the most important stakeholder, when in fact they're one of many, but in the moment with them, one-on-one or group-on-one, they need to know that they have your full and committed attention to what might be on their mind at that time. So it sounds like you have to be a UN, United Nations diplomat maybe for this role in order to be successful, and there's maybe a little bit of truth about that. But another dynamic that can happen is when you step into that role, we've seen over and over and have experienced ourselves that you can feel like you've been hit with a tsunami. It's everything all at once, and nobody is looking to be told where they're in the ranks of your priorities. They all have to be met where they are, and it can feel like it's coming at you very hard, very fast. And the trick is learning to balance that and how to work your way through it. And so the idea of managing up now probably takes on a new level of importance in the skills that you have to exercise and develop. It's no longer just the managing of a team below you or inspiring a team below you, but being anticipatory of the needs of the folks to whom you report and making sure that you're ahead of the curve as often as you possibly can be, and exercising a deeper level probably of emotional intelligence, really learning to listen and see and understand what's going on beyond simply what's being said, what might actually be inferred or conveyed to you in other kinds of ways beyond the actual conversation that's underway. So it's a lot and it can feel overwhelming, and we're hoping we'll have a chance to make that a little more manageable today from the good advice we'll receive from our panelists.
All right, well, now we're ready to hear from Jason and Mike and Kimberly. So I'll start with a couple of questions. If you would each tell us about what you are currently doing in your positions and what are your responsibilities and area of focus as the Chief Development Officer or the Vice President of Advancement, and what is your professional past and the path that led you to this position. So Jason, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thank you. And Richard, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just want to make sure that, thank you very much. So for me, I actually spent about the first decade of my career in sales and marketing role. I was a music major in college, did my practicums my junior year, and just decided the classroom was not calling to me. And so I did what a lot of kids in Iowa do when we have a music degree. I went to work for an insurance company. And so I did that for about the first decade of my career, decided I want to do something more intrinsically valuable. So I got a master's degree with Iowa State, and they offered me a position in their foundation. I'd never thought about fundraising before, but really loved it. After doing that for a few years, I actually got a position with a private school in a sort of my first chief development officer role in a small private school that was very financially strapped and difficult. From there, went to California State University system in an associate vice president role at one of the smaller campuses there. Before Gregory and the team recruited me to Arkansas Tech to be what I would consider my first lead development or chief advancement role here at Arkansas Tech. It's a regional university. I oversee all the community relations, fundraising, alumni engagement, that sort of thing. We're currently operating a $55 million campaign. It's the first comprehensive campaign in the history of the university. And a school that 10 years ago was doing about $1 million a year in fundraising, and now we're doing it was about $5 or $6 million a year when I got here. Now it's about 10 or $12 million that we're doing each year as part of the campaign. So it's been a tremendous time of growth. Also very challenging because I interviewed in January 2020, got the job in February 2020, and I started March 9th, 2020, just about a week before the whole world shut down. So you can imagine starting a new position, chief fundraising officer position right then when my family was stuck in California, sheltering in place for about 6 weeks. It was very, very challenging, but it's been a really, really fantastic experience here. And but Arkansas Tech University, Russellville, Arkansas, vice president for advancement here.
Great. All right, Mike.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, so my background's a little bit different, although I think everybody's in fundraising and this type of work tends to be, but my undergraduate and graduate work were related to medical science research and possibly pre-med, and then it wasn't, and I had an opportunity to do this fundraising work at my alma mater at the University of Arizona, and fell into it and just loved it, and loved the opportunity to talk with people about the university, talk about the mission, the capital campaign that we were beginning to launch and then launching. And that work continued to lead me at other big name universities. And so I've really enjoyed the opportunities to both work internally with academic leadership and then externally with stakeholders, alumni or non-alumni, to find interest in these connections, the marriage, right, of a potential fundraising opportunity and a potential donor, and trying to find those opportunities. Doing all of the kind of the analytical legwork has always been interesting to me, especially in the pre-campaign planning. And so I got to do more and more of that in universities, and that would always kind of lead to more advancement, career advancement positions at universities. And then started at the Desert Botanical Garden in this role almost a year ago. So next month will be a year. Transition out of the pandemic was probably part of the reason for that. And two board members came to me, said that they wanted me to take a look at the job. And somebody who runs a local foundation, Arizona Community Foundation, the CEO also asked me to take a look at it. And the more I learned, the more I got excited about the organization, and yeah, I've just jumped into it this past year. We are in the middle of a capital project. We are avoiding the word campaign for some strategic reasons, but we are putting together a $15 million capital project, building a few new structures here for our research staff, and we have raised just over $8.5 million so far this calendar year for that effort. So all of you that are in fundraising know that this stuff doesn't typically happen quickly, and there is a lot of planning. So you can tell just by the number that I mentioned that there's a really high affinity for the donors for this organization, and that's been a lot of fun for me to start exploring.
Great, thank you. And Kimberly.
Morning, everybody, and thank you, Richard. My path actually a lot different in some ways from our two colleagues here, Jason and Mike, but in some senses also similar. I think most of us land in fundraising as what I would call a mistake. You don't know that that's where you belong until you land there. But my path has been through arts and culture. So I have been in much smaller organizations. I worked primarily in Southern California before moving to this role at the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. So at the Palm Springs Desert Museum, the Huntington Library, the Scripps College for a short time, and then the LA Philharmonic before, kind of like Jason, making a move when COVID happened, although I was furloughed and then laid off and made my move this direction. I would share that, for me, kind of the path to get to where I am today is just partly being a part of the nonprofit community for a very long time. I started in planned giving and moved my way through. I think when you have the shoulders of mentors to crawl on top of and get pushed into places where you're not sure that you are ready to go, it's how you end up in a lot of the leadership roles when someone else is identifying the leadership qualities that you have and encouraging you to take a leap of faith, which is usually the right thing. You just can't see it for yourself always at the time that it happens. I'm also unrelated to my colleagues, much smaller teams and much smaller campaigns, but hopefully also very important in our world. I manage a team of 10, and as Richard was saying, we represent properties both here in Scottsdale, Arizona, the Taliesin West property, and Taliesin, which was Frank Lloyd Wright's original home in Spring Creek, Wisconsin. And so a lot of our work is smaller campaigns to help meet the needs of preservation projects on aging infrastructure, and then growing foundational support over what is a much larger ecosystem. His name is known, but there are a lot of us that carry his name, and so trying to identify potential donors to support the foundation versus some of the other entities in the ecosystem, as I say. So very excited to be a part of this panel, and it's always interesting to hear everybody else's paths. So thanks to Jason and Mike for sharing what they have already.
I should have started with some housekeeping in that we will have plenty of time for Q&A, but if you have a pressing question, either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Amy will monitor it, and we will go to some questions if they're pressing questions addressed to anyone in particular. So you all have given us an idea of your path in the past and what you're up to now. I would like to talk a little bit about what particular strengths do you think you brought to this position in your first, senior leadership position, and where did you have a limited experience, and how did you overcome that limited experience? So strengths and challenges or limited experience, and we'll go in the same order. Jason, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks very much, Richard. So for me, having been in sales and fundraising for all of my career, I felt like I stepped into this role with a really, really good understanding of the fundraising process, from identification through solicitation and stewardship. And we've had tremendous success here, growing fundraising and all of that. I think for me, some of the things that I would encourage people to look at a little bit more, oftentimes when we're end up in these senior development officer roles, we know the fundraising piece really well. We've been successful in fundraising. That's why we've moved up in our career. But for me, even having spent the first 10 years of my career sort of in investments and that sort of thing, managing the endowment here and all the hundreds of decisions you have to make, it seems like every week, about how to manage an endowment, how to invest the endowment. We just transitioned our investment advisor, which was a very, very large and arduous process. How to set a spending rate, all of those decisions that you have to make. It seems like every week there's new things you have to decide, and those decisions all come to your desk, and who are the stakeholders that you need to involve in doing that was a lot more challenging for me. Also, we totally revamped our revenue model in the foundation when I got here, because the one that we had was very antiquated, very unpredictable, and almost impossible in which to build an annual budget to support fundraising operations. And so that was a brand new process for me as well. So, and all the, list pulls and deduping and things like that it was nothing that I had, real deep in-depth experience with. And those are things that I would encourage folks who are looking at taking on, that chief development officer role. Spend some time with, the back office folks where you're at. Spend some time maybe looking at a enrollment management conference or webinars or something like that, to kind of start wrapping your head around what sorts of decisions are going to end up on your desk. And I've made some errors there. And there are some things that I wanted to do early on that my staff didn't have the same urgency that I had to fix those problems. And so they fell a little bit lower on the priority list. And now that the market's down, taking a correction, I wish those were some things I had pushed a little bit harder. But I would just encourage everybody, learn and get to know those back office functions a little bit more. I think another big challenge that I had is serving on the president's cabinet. You're just not used to the politics of sort of being so recognizable, and you seem to get credit for every decision that's made on the campus, whether you did it or not. And that goes for internal constituents as well as external. I remember sitting with a donor who was angry at us that we now had a homecoming king. We'd always had a homecoming queen for years and years and years, and he just didn't think a homecoming king made any sense. Well, that had nothing to do with us. That was the students made that decision to add that, the student activities board, but we were taking the blame for it. So just learning how to sort of be an ambassador for those hundreds and hundreds of decisions that take place on the campus that you really don't have any control over, but that you become the face of nonetheless. Those are challenging things to deal with too. So the biggest challenges for me, learning a lot of those back office operations, being part of the president's cabinet, being one of the most recognizable faces on a campus, those were some challenges for me as I stepped into this role.
That's great. Learning the back of house, I think, is critically important, particularly as you come up with a major gift officer or specialist in plan giving or whatever it may be. Those policies and procedures and data and information management and reporting and metrics is very difficult, and it can be overwhelming. And, if you are tracking to wanting to become a chief development officer, the idea of getting to know your colleagues in those areas, learning from them who are doing the jobs, but also you said, going to conferences like case conferences in those areas. We tend to think of case conferences to go deep in our area of expertise as opposed to broaden our capabilities. I think that's great. And then also with the president's cabinet, that is such a challenge, not only for the reasons that you said, but that is where you're going to run into the biggest risk of time management. Because now you're going to be a part of the senior leadership team. You're going to get drawn into all of these institutional decision making. And frankly, you are amongst peers, but you have a different role with the president than anybody else, because you're going to have a really strong and tight role with the president as a chief fundraiser, both you as the VP, the president. So that also it's an issue for time management. It's an issue for how to manage your relationship with your peers if they think that, sometimes you've got more access to the president than they do.
And I totally agree with that. The other thing I would just share with people too is just make sure as you're tracking for this, that your family is totally on board with you as well. That's been, I think, a challenge for us too. Our kids are still pretty young. We have junior high and grade school kids. And it's challenging being at a pretty good sized university in a pretty small community that makes your family pretty recognizable as well. I would say that's something my wife hasn't necessarily appreciated about that, and just presents some challenges on the family side too. So just make sure that your family's on board with you, tracking with you, because that's going to present different challenges than you may have had previously as well.
All right. Okay, Mike, over to you.
All right, thank you, Richard. Yeah, I'll talk about some of those challenges in a second, but Jason, I'm going to echo a number of things that you just said. So yeah, as far as the strengths that I think I'm bringing to the table, I've always felt like I'm a really good listener, but then I'm always asking that question of why a lot. And Simon Sinek's book some years ago really, for me, codified that concept. And so I'm just constantly trying to understand why we do things the way we do them, and trying to see if we should improve them or not. It's enjoyable being the new guy because you get to ask a lot of questions. You can even say I'm asking stupid questions, but I'm going to ask them. But you have to balance whether or not the new guy's coming in with just university-based ideas that just won't work at a community-based nonprofit. So you have to pick your battles, definitely, when those types of conversations. But again, just the types of listening that I'm doing, sort of the analytical approach I bring to things. Again, I mentioned my academic background, my science background. I've really been enjoying the past number of years, the fact that data has become more and more a part of our profession. I feel very comfortable in these large data sets, and I feel like I'm asking some good questions of our analytics and research folks and some of our back office types of roles, just to make sure that we are really thinking more cleanly about how we approach some of our donor prospects. So I think those are a few of the strengths that I'm bringing to the job. Some of the shortcomings, again, that the systems and the process that Jason mentioned, I've had only cursory experience dealing with those, but many times when you're at a university, you're just kind of dealing with the front face of some of the systems. And in this type of role, you really are digging into how things are working. We're having a great opportunity here at the Garden that about a year and a half ago, there was a whole analysis of all of the legacy systems that weren't talking to each other. And we're now getting new systems that integrate. And the final piece of that will be Salesforce, which we will be lighting up later this spring. And that will be the final piece. And I'm really looking forward to that. I've had experience with Salesforce, but it has been fun working with the team now to help build it. Because some of the systems that I've used in the past seems to have been designed by finance teams or research teams and never having fundraisers at the table. Even though they're the ones that bring in all the money, the systems never seem to work for the fundraisers. So I feel like I'm finally making
a whole other webinar that we have.
or a therapy session. But I'm really feeling like the fundraisers really have a chance. We can have some really healthy conversations to make sure these systems are easier for us to use when we're looking for some of that data. So that's definitely something that has been challenging. Again, back to Jason's comment, there's a lot of spreadsheets, and I'm really working hard to get people, because I just cannot deal with so many different copies of spreadsheets, and we just need to start using systems, especially now that we're paying money to buy a lot of these new systems. So it's been challenging for me to get people to get less comfortable with all of these spreadsheets and start using the systems in front of them. So that has been a little bit of a challenge. One other thing that I was thinking about when I was thinking about this question was just this idea of quote unquote managing philanthropy. When you work at larger universities, we do important work. A lot of it's related to scholarships. But when you look at the overall budget of the institution, it's a very, very small percent of the revenue, the overall revenue. But now these types of jobs represent a very significant percentage of revenue. Right now, we probably, this fiscal year we're in, my team will represent over 20% of the overall revenue. And then the capital projects I mentioned before, nearly 100%. And so, if we don't raise the money, the building won't get built. So there's a definite, I knew coming into this job, I would think differently about philanthropy, and that is definitely ringing true, that the work we do is more critical for these smaller community-based organizations. And so that was something that I was concerned to make sure that I could think more seriously about as I started this work.
If we have time, we'll come back to that issue, because, when you had advancement for a nonprofit organization where your portion of the revenue may be 60, 70, 50, 60, 70% of it, and the doors, you are responsible for keeping the doors open and paying compensation and providing services to people in need. That's a whole different level of intensity of fundraising than it might be within a large university or hospital system. So we'll try to come back to that. Kimberly, you want to go next, please?
Sure. And to my colleagues, I mean, your numbers are so much bigger, and I appreciate hearing that your challenges are in many senses the same as mine. I touched on this question in a slightly different way to say the things kind of interpersonally that I brought to the table. I would say for any leader, humility is probably one of the first places that I would start. You have to realize that as much as you're a leader, you're still a voice that either is taking the brunt of the bad, as Jason was describing. You get blamed for everything, and that's fine. You just take it on. Or you get credit for things that in some senses you had nothing to do with either. And it's being willing to kind of sit in that place and be comfortable with it and know that ultimately you're working for the organization that you're representing, not for your own personal good. And in some senses, not necessarily for the board, for the CEO, whatever. You're working for the organization, and you just happen to be a part of the people and human capital that are moving it forward. I think that all three of us, we come to this role having a lot of experience in a bunch of other circumstances. And I think that's the key thing. You can want to be a leader, but the experience allows you to be a leader because you've had the relationships with other staff members, with other processes. You bring all of that with you, whether or not you feel like you have it or not. And the work that I've done since the mid 90s all kind of put me in a place where I was ready to take on this role. And I tried to leap into this before. I probably could have done the job by nature of skill set, but I'm not sure that I was emotionally ready for it in quite the same way as all the things that brought me to this point. I think the other thing, particularly in smaller nonprofits, we like Mike's scenario, the revenue that comes from either tickets through the door or from donations is what drives the success of an organization when you're dealing with a much smaller budget. So the idea of being able to think outside the box and help your colleagues think outside the box with you, and that there isn't always a straight answer from A to B. There are often many solutions, and it may be that, to Mike's point, reinventing the systems that you have so they're all working better together, instead of that, not asking the question why. It's we accept what we have, trying to kind of change and move that needle constantly. I would say my challenge is being new to an area that I've not been in for many, many years, is just the getting to know the community and what the temperature of the community is in a way. And I'm guessing Jason felt this moving to Arkansas. You know that you can be that people person and the connector and the other things that you've already done well in your other jobs, but it's starting over in a way that means that it takes a lot more time than if you were in a place where you're already well conditioned and you know the players in the community. So I think, the challenge is literally time management. How do you just find time to do all these things? I said it as recently as last night. When I was doing something at 11 p.m., I only wished for 12 more hours in every single day so that I could get everything done. And, some of that's my own problem, time management, but I do think, kind of back to Jason's point, you end up having so many things that are thrown on your plate that you have to be very skilled at figuring out how to delegate, how to, allow others to step into their own leadership roles, their own job responsibilities, and be that spoke in the wheel that kind of passes it on to other places. But not to say that that's bad. All of it's incredibly good and fun. And I think at the heart of that is that you're hearing from three of us that we all love what we do and we're passionate about what we represent. And I think, to me, that's also very key in a strong leader. If you can't articulate the mission and the vision, but then also show that you have personal passion for it, it's just not going to come across the same. And your team will know it. Your exterior stakeholders will know it. You need to love what you're doing, or it just doesn't work.
Terrific. I like what you said about, well, blame, you might get blamed for things that you didn't do. You might get credit for things that you didn't do. But there's oftentimes in this role too, that you don't get credit for what you have done. And that credit goes to the president, it goes to the chairman of the board. I had an experience when we were in a $150 million campaign. We got a $60 million gift. We had raised 75 million. We're having a bit of a celebration. And on stage were the president, of course, and the donor, of course, but the chief marketing officer, the chief financial officer, others who had nothing to do with the gift. And, you know, I'm kind of faded away in the audience and that kind of stuff. And the donor was like, why aren't you up here? Well, you know, that's when we fade into the woodwork, and our role is to fade into the woodwork.
And I would say to that, Richard, at least the donor knew that you were supposed to have been on the stage. That's the most important thing. The reward for you is the relationship that you've created.
That's a great
Very
point.
good point.
I'm
I
reminded.
have an identical example, Richard, Kimberly, that has recently happened. I think we're going to get at least a $500,000 gift from this local foundation. And everyone has forgotten that it was my idea to approach them. And that is okay with me, because I was just really happy to see it synthesized so quickly. And I think it's going to happen. But nobody remembers where the idea came from, and I don't care.
Right. Get the money. Worry about the credit later, right?
There's that old adage of success has many parents and failure is an orphan, right? It definitely plays that way. But I want to put a circle around something that everybody touched on one way or another that I really think is one of those quantum leaps that happens when you step into these roles. And that's that movement from the kind of data that's really micro focused on the fundraising, renewal rates and donor acquisition and annual goals and the number of proposals and closes and those kinds of data versus that big picture financial statement for the institution and how you fit into that and the ownership that has to happen that way. And there's not much that happens in a fundraising career that prepares you to understand finance writ large. And so if you're lucky enough to have been able to be exposed to that, maybe you're better prepared for when you have to sit down with the CFO of the institution and plan the institutional budget and make a financial commitment to the institution. That's a very different prospect than working with your team of fundraisers and setting their annual goals. So whatever you might be able to do to acquire that exposure or understanding more about balance sheets and income statements and the revenue drivers that are unique to the nonprofit industry or profession, I think that's time well spent to make you a little less intimidated by that dynamic, or also just be more prepared for it when you are facing it as a CDO. And a question I have for the panelists is this whole idea of what motivates you to take on this new leap, because on one hand you have to have the self-confidence, which everybody touched on, to do it, but also the humility to realize you're not going to get a lot of the credit for the things that you do or your teams do, and you have to be quite okay with that. But when you step into the role for the first time and you're moved into that, what really drove you to want to step into a role that has those dynamics where you are in the spotlight, where suddenly you're a community public figure in a way that you probably never have been before, all the things that you touched on? Why become a CDO or a VP of development? And I'm going to reverse the order, if Kimberly doesn't mind, just to change the rhythm here a little bit. And if you don't mind, Kimberly, could we start with you?
Sure, of course we can. In reflecting on that question, I think, some of it is just an inherent confidence in the skills that you bring. You haven't made it successfully through all your other positions. Or hopefully you have made it through successfully, and you're now being considered for this new role. I think for me, touching upon that humility again, it's confidence in what you bring, but then understanding that you may not have every skill set in the skill set that you need, but that you have the ability to ask for help there. So, if you aren't strong in a particular area, whatever that may be, realizing that your other colleagues on your senior team or your CEO or others, or asking for outside help. Thank you, Gregory. Just as someone else to talk to about the things that you're struggling with, so that you can do a a check related to, this is my intuition in this scenario. Am I actually really thinking about it right? Or am I missing something? And I think probably for Mike, you know, it's probably been a very big leap for you in this last year in terms of what you knew in the university environment and what you faced coming to an organization that doesn't have all of the systems and processes that a university environment does. And realizing that though you have that expertise, it translates differently in different environments, and being able to accept that and admit it, and admit that you're supposed to have an answer, but you might not always have that answer, and you're going to go find it somewhere else. So I think our skill sets are important. The ability to ask for help when you need it is important, and allow your teams to see you as human, that you're not always going to be the one that has the answer, but you're going to work with them to find the answers. And, you know, and I think in many senses, having those qualities will make you seem like the seasoned pro that you are, because you are willing to ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, that's really great. Before I ask Jason to weigh in, I'll just, for Kimberly's reference about thank you, she's referring to the fact that although Aspen Leadership Group did not recruit Kimberly to come to the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, as she was coming in the foundation, and Kimberly reached out to our firm for a consultation service to partner with Kimberly in those early days for the very things that she was talking about. And I was lucky enough to be asked to participate in that. And so we got to know each other very well during those 6 months and be able to look at things from multiple angles. And thank you for that comment. I appreciate that. Jason, what about you in terms of the ambition to step into this level of a role?
Yeah, well, I think for me, I just love the ability to impact really big things that and impact a lot of people. I mean, when you're in this role, in addition to you know, being on the president's council and sort of being able to direct certain things with the university, you also have the ability to take those priorities and find funders. I remember you know, we wanted to start a very specific nursing program, and we had a 5-year plan to do it, and we found a funder to step up and donate. We were able to move that program up 3 years, start at 3 years before we were planning to, just because we were able to find the funding to do it. So you have the opportunity to really impact some big things. The other thing, and this is maybe off topic from this question a little bit, but something that we all hit on a little bit, and I would just bring it up as something that people want to be aware of too. The other quantum leap that I really enjoy a lot, stepping into a chief development officer role, is working with boards and managing boards. So that's one thing that a lot of us, you know, coming up on the fundraising side, you know, we go to those foundation board meetings. We manage people that may be on the foundation board, but actually managing the board, managing their agenda, and also managing conflicts that inevitably come up between the foundation board and your organization's board, the university board of trustees, who, you know, are appointed by the governor of the state. Those are all things that are very challenging. And so I'd encourage folks too to do at least a little bit of reading and develop a little bit more of a philosophy on board management, policy management, things like that. That will serve you very, very well as you step into this role. I remember stepping into it and thinking it was going to be just such a really enjoyable experience. And then I stepped into this role a week later, everything shuts down due to COVID. And it was really, really challenging trying to manage a you know, $50+ million campaign. And all of a sudden we're hearing that the state of Arkansas may be pulling some of our funding for the current year, with only 3 years left, or 3 months left in the fiscal year. And so all of a sudden we're trying to find funding, and so the first ask that I had to go to my foundation board and make was, can we basically take from our reserves $500,000 and give it to the university to support payroll? That was the first conversation I really had to have with my board chair when I stepped into the role. So you know, there's just going to be those inevitable challenges that come up, but it's something, I bring it up here because it's something I've really come to enjoy, is that board management piece, discussing important items with your board, and building consensus. That's another big key, building consensus on your board to make changes to how your revenues derive, how you're supporting the university, what your spending rate's going to be, all those things, building that consensus is something that you want to have a good philosophy on how to manage the board, but also it's something that I've really come to enjoy and was looking forward to about stepping into this role.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's an important dynamic because, of course, those are not just constituents. Those people have genuine power and influence over your job and the direction of the institution. And so we'll come to this a little bit later, I think, but there's consensus that doesn't get built sometimes also, and that can also fall to you. And there are challenges and pitfalls when those dynamics emerge in the way it affects your role. But Mike, what about your thoughts in terms of the ambition to step into this role and kind of hold on to the steering wheel of self-confidence?
Hold on to it for dear life. Yeah, so you know, and again, I thought about this question a little bit. Just from my undergraduate semester, I've spent almost 30 years on a university campus. And, you know, people always kind of refer back to the pandemic as a time of reflection. I'm not going to say I didn't do that, but it was kind of an opportunity just to kind of see things that you've done in life. And 30 years is a long time. It wasn't total 30 years, but close to it. And so, you know, again, this was an opportunity just to do something completely different. I was also wrapping up an MBA program right as the pandemic was starting up. I was finishing that. And to your earlier comments, Gregory, about the language of business, and I was going to mention that later in a wrap up, which I might again, but just asking better questions of finance people is critical to this job. And I would recommend anybody who's looking to advance in a nonprofit career, figure out how to just get better knowledge in the foundations of accounting and just thinking differently about numbers. Because to your point, Gregory, gift officers are setting metrics and they're important, what measures gets done, but that really doesn't directly relate to a balance sheet at times, right? So, you know, taking the skill set I was learning from there and feeling like I want to do more than what I'm doing. And again, knowing that the opportunity at the Garden, I would be able to roll up my sleeves and really have those important conversations with the leadership, finance leadership, the general leadership, and the board. I just thought was great. But also through the pandemic, we all really saw the resiliency of philanthropy. And, you know, smaller nonprofits, again, need to worry about keeping the lights on in ways that large universities don't. But it was comforting for me to see that through the pandemic, everyone was figuring it out. And I think I got some comfort from that, knowing that while I would be strategic in what organizations I'm looking at, I knew that the Garden was very well managed, financially very well managed, and it was easier for me to move away from that university setting. And Kimberly, I will touch on, yeah, while the systems don't work as well as I wish they would at the Garden, the systems at universities are not necessarily that much better. They're just larger, but one huge plus that I've really enjoyed about this place is that nearly 100% of my phone calls either get answered when I call or I get a call back. And that was almost the biggest thing I had to get over when I started in January and somebody picked up the phone when I was fully prepared to leave a message. And I would almost stumble because I was talking to the person I really wanted to talk to. So that was a nice change from the responses you get from alumni who haven't chatted with you for 30 years. So
that's really true and so funny how you are much more accessible in some ways in those smaller organizations, and where you would normally expect others in a big university to push you off or ignore your call for a few days or weeks or years. Then you might be surprised by what happens in a place like the Desert Botanic Gardens or the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. You often hear this phrase about it's lonely at the top, and you know, so here you are at the top, and yet one of the things that I think might be important when you step into those roles is to find somebody within the organization that really can be an ally with you or a supporter of you, or if you're lucky enough, maybe even a mentor for you. And I'm wondering, as you have all thought about that loneliness of the position, if that's been real for you in the short times that you've been in the roles, and if you have had a chance to reach out or had somebody reach out to you to create that partnership, that you really felt like somebody at the executive level within the organization, has your back and is looking out for you and wants you to be successful and is committed to helping you be successful. How did you find that person? Was it just organic? Did they find you? I'd love to hear some stories around that. And I'm going to change the order again and start with Jason, since he's the one outside in the beautiful weather and has the great sunshine and lighting.
Yeah, thank you. And I missed the end of your question. My feed cut out for just a second there, but I think I've got the gist of it. And we have an Ozark campus here that's kind of a remote campus, about 45 minutes from our main campus. We have a chancellor there, and he's really become sort of a mentor to me. He's just well respected within our organization here, someone I look up to and talk with him quite a bit. Not a fundraising guy, but definitely understands leadership. And can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Looks like it cut out again.
You're freezing a little bit, but you're coming through fine.
But I would also encourage everybody to have some people in a little bit more of an extended network. For me, there's really been two people for me who have been very, very helpful in my current position, one of which I'm going to rat out because I see him as one of the attendees on the call. It's Stephen Cole, who's now at McKendree. He's a guy that, he and I would just used to text and talk just all the time. We were both kind of in chief advancement officer roles that we kind of came to at a similar time. I would consider him sort of an expert in development officer metrics and some other things that maybe weren't as strong of points for me when I first got into this role. I think he really understands campaign strategy really well too. Another one, I'm not going to share her name just because I don't, she's not on the call or anything, but somebody that Gregory Leet actually introduced me to. She was stepping into her first chief development officer role about the same time I was stepping into mine, and an organization that ended up having a lot of the same challenges that I was facing here. And she and I started doing a monthly just video call on Zoom, kind of talking through what we were working on, and never even met her face to face, but we talk every month and bounce ideas off each other and things like that. So I'd encourage everyone, it is a little bit lonely. You are expected to be the expert in this topic on your campus. And that means you've got to have some people in a little bit more of an extended network that are similarly situated, maybe, or even are a step or two ahead of you, or going through something very similar to you. Have those folks in your network that you can call on, bounce ideas off of, ask advice, etc.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Mike, what are your thoughts about finding an ally and how that might happen and how lonely it might or might not have been so far for you?
Yeah, so the structure we have here at the Garden, there are 4 of us that carry that C-suite level title, and I've worked hard from day one just to have good connections with them. So I meet weekly with each of them. We talk informally and formally about stuff. So I've just really wanted to develop relationships with them because I am the new guy. And so one of them has been here 25 years. And so I want to really understand that kind of history. And then in addition, colleagues that I've known over the years, both in the university setting and here in the local community, I do make sure to have monthly lunches with those types of folks as well to help keep me centered in some of the conversations, and I get to ask questions of them. One of them is an attorney, and so there are times I can ask questions about some of the intricacies of how gifts get counted. Estate gifts get counted in particular. And so, again, we all step into these roles with different experiences, and I never try to imitate that I know everything about how we need to look at things. And so I'm trying to be very comfortable asking questions about some of our processes. Things that may or may not be in tax code, or we think is in tax code, or whatever. But I just want to always keep having those conversations, because things do change, and I want to be comfortable with folks both internally and externally to ask questions.
Thanks, Mike. Kimberly, how about on your end? Was you stepped in, not just new to the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, but new to the Phoenix fundraising community?
Yeah, I would think I just tag on to what Jason and Mike have both said. I think you find mentors, and colleagues that, as Jason was saying, kind of one step ahead of you on a path, so that you can be looking to them to help understand some of the situations that you're facing that might not be familiar. I think, to Mike's point, just developing strong relationships with the other colleagues at the same level of you. When I kind of wrote out an answer to this in my own head, it was essentially, I think you end up finding your network because you're like-minded people. You see the organization in the same way, you see it moving forward in the same way. So, you're kind of drawn to each other even without having to seek one another out. And it might be, to Mike's point, it might be that you're all in similar positions, but I think also, to his point, it's informal and formal meetings with each other that that you can bounce off certain things with each other that is really not something you should be sharing with other people, but it's to let off steam with each other or talk through an issue. It may not surprise some of you that know me that my mom has always called me a people keeper. So I have worked hard through all of my roles across the different states to keep people that I found as my own mentors, or those that I've menteed or mentored to them, close. So we stay in close communication, so that there's always that open email, phone line to share information. I get calls from people that have taken my roles at other organizations all the time. Oh, do you remember donor X? They're doing this. Can you help me with this scenario? Or, I know that whatever we say is in that cone of silence. Can I share this with you so that I can talk it through, maybe not an outside, resource, but someone that feels like an internal resource because they have shared knowledge with you. And, that's been really good for me in every level, both being the one that's being called upon for advice, and then also having those open doors to other people to be able to call upon. I think we can never have too many resources at our fingertips and in our old-fashioned Rolodex.
Before I turn it over to Richard again, I'll just say that I think that's so important to have that place where you can check in, because it does change in the role. It's not so much oftentimes about the advocacy of your teams anymore. Your loyalties and commitments are to your executive peers and to the chief officer of the organization, and that's where you have to protect information and put that as the top priority. And sometimes it creates a conflict. But having a sounding board, somebody you can just vent that with when you find yourselves maybe caught in one of those situations. Jason may recall this based on what he was even just saying about the person that I helped him connect to. Aspen Leadership Group, we try to tell everybody that we place, use us as a sounding board. We're happy to have that conversation just for that purpose, or to help you find somebody, as we were able to do with Jason. And I know Richard often likes to be helpful that way also, but wherever you find that resource, it is really important to find somebody like that you can have a cone of silence with, and either just let the steam off, or actually get sage input about how to solve a problem, or how to look at something, or how to tackle an issue. But I'll turn it over to Richard now for some other thoughts and questions.
I would just add to this strain of thought that also, if you encounter criticism from another executive or a member of the board or whatever, and you don't understand the source of that criticism, go back to them and have a conversation about it. I can remember when I first stepped into a senior role at an academic institution, and a member of the provost and the member of the board of trustees, we just were not seeing, eye to eye. And I couldn't figure out why. And I kept trying to resolve the issue without really asking what their issues were. And I went into each one of their offices, confronted them, had conversation, and it helped so much to put things on the right track. And I think that they were extremely surprised that, given the fact that they had been somewhat critical, that I wanted to sit down with them and address those issues. So Gregory and I got plenty more questions, but let's turn it over to you and see if any of you have any questions that you want to address. So you can just raise your hand or speak up or put them in the chat.
I did appreciate Stephen Call's comment about being envious of Jason having hair. I have that issue every day, which is why I grew out my beard. But hopefully that's a good place to throw questions. So if anybody has any, everyone can see them all at once and go back and reference it again too.
Well, keep thinking about them. I'll ask one more. Peter Smith's a colleague of mine in Phoenix Philanthropy Group, who particularly Jason knows and others may know. He's done some definitive research on the culture of philanthropy, particularly within higher education. And we, as a firm, have done research on shared leadership, particularly looking at the shared leadership concept between a chief development officer, a CEO, and a chairman of the board. And particularly in Peter's research, he has found that there's often, both early in the relationship and continuing in the relationship, a disconnect between those three, with each one of them thinking their other colleagues should be doing more or could contribute more. And they are working so hard themselves. And I'm doing all of this without necessarily being supported by my other two colleagues. And it really comes down to a fact that there are not common and consistent plans, performance metrics, evaluation methodology, and there's not consistent communication on a regular basis to make sure that you are all measuring and you all know what the end game is, you all know what your ultimate goals are, and you all are evaluating performance against those goals in the same way. So sometimes that means that you stepping into a chief development officer role have to really play a role of stepping out and saying, okay, how are we going to measure performance? What are we going to be doing? And it's not just measuring the performance of the chief development officer, frankly, it's measuring the performance of the president and the chairman of the board. So I'll just open it up to our team here. Kimberly or Jason or Mike or Gregory, do any of you have experience with that? And how have you dealt with those issues?
I can jump in briefly. I would just say it's not so much around the performance and metrics. I mean, I think it's learning the personality and work styles of those people and then being able to play to the strengths of the work styles. For me, I have a great relationship with both my CEO and my chairman of the board. Chairman of the board is incredibly supportive of my work, which gives me one of those mentor relationships or confidant relationships that you don't always get the opportunity to have. And I've found that profoundly helpful. For those that are colleagues of mine here at the foundation, you're just not hearing this in the moment, but I think that we sometimes are put in positions where we have to be very careful about that role of Switzerland and how you play one side off of the other, kind of to your comments, Richard. And my chairman of the board is frequently asking me, so give me the insider story. What's going on here? And you have to be very careful. It's a lovely entree to be able to have a very open conversation, but it also can be fraught with problems if you overstep the line. Clearly, I'm the employee. I am not the CEO and I am not the chairman of the board. And so I think, for good or bad, we're put into these scenarios between in that triangle. If you have the confidence of both, but you have to be very careful about what role you play in all of that. And while I find it challenging at some moments, I'm also very grateful for having those good relationships and being able to work through kind of what you mentioned, Richard, if there is an issue, having the ability to have an open door and have a conversation about it and still feel supported in the work we do.
Anybody else want to answer?
I'll just quickly say we've got a board that's over 40 people, and that kind of terrified me when I was looking at this job because I just couldn't imagine how that functioned. But it works really well here. The board and our executive director go through a strategic planning session every 5 years, and everything gravitates back to that document. I mean, it is truly a living document in ways that I've never seen a strategic plan actually be operationalized once it gets generated. So I think having that document allows everyone to center conversations related to annual goals or any sort of metrics for any of the departments, including fundraising. It all centers back to that document. And I think it really helps everybody stay focused on what we're trying to do, and ensures, you know, again, while it's such a large board, they work hard to keep each other also in balance about how they're engaging with the organization. And I couldn't even tell you how many committees there are that are part of the board. Some of them have board members, and some of them aren't even board members. They're just community members who are participating. And so, but it all gets rolled up into that strategic plan. So it's nice to have that anchoring document so that we're not having kind of extraneous, especially in our world, kind of like the fire drills, like emergency fundraising, which I'm never a fan of. So,
Jason, you want to add?
Yeah, I think the one thing for me that's been this is something a mentor told me, and I've really held on to it, because organizational politics, especially on a university campus, when there are so many competing constituencies, it's just one of those things where I would just say, make sure that your agenda is the president's agenda. Don't have your own. Don't play games. Don't be seen as a person that has divided loyalties, or is always telling every group what they want to hear, and come across as someone that is just sort of trying to play everyone off of each other. Make sure your agenda is the president's agenda. Make sure the president knows that you are his or her biggest cheerleader, biggest supporter. And you're going to have disagreements with your president. You're going to have disagreements with your board. Have all of those conversations behind closed doors, and make sure that you are always seen as the one that is, when you step out of the room, firmly behind your president and their agenda and their priorities. I've seen far too many people get crossways, and it's a hard thing to recover from if your president doesn't feel that they can trust you implicitly to not only being able to keep a confidence, but also to be firmly behind their priorities, and not to some of the other groups on campus that are vying for resources and time. So that would be just the best advice that I could give. From the moment you step on campus, make sure that your president has trust in you to be the one that's going to be firmly behind their agenda, their priorities, and every day you're going to go about furthering those in everything that you do.
I'd like to expand on that for just a minute. I would add to that, and that is absolutely sterling advice. And one of the comments that we often see in the search world, when we get down to the final stages of a search with a chief development officer and the lead executive of the organization, is no longer a conversation about competencies and core skills. That's all been established. The track record is usually very easy to identify and point to. What really makes or breaks not only the hiring decision, but also the go forward success is the chemistry between those two individuals, just like Jason is saying. And a step to building that chemistry is to protect that confidentiality, but also to be understood and visible as the cheerleader. There can be no room between you and that leader. There can be no air between it. People cannot see a crack. The other side of that coin is that when people know you have that kind of relationship with the chief executive, they will take advantage of your relationship, both as to tell you things that they don't want to tell the CEO or the president directly, or the chancellor. They're hoping that you'll carry that message on their behalf so that they can avoid the potential conflict, particularly when they might disagree with something that has been decided or is currently in conversation, let's say within the board or within one of the committees of the board. And that is a very precarious place to be, as Kimberly was alluding to. You have to really know where that line is. And I'm afraid to say that sometimes the only way you know where that line is when you step on it and find out that maybe something that you thought was true isn't true, or that something you thought you could talk about, you couldn't talk about. It's not always black and white. You have to trust instincts, and you have to have confidence that the president or the CEO or the chancellor has your back in the same way. So that chemistry is absolutely paramount in everything that happens going forward, so that you can negotiate the differences. You know, there may be questions within the board of going on a campaign or not, the timing of a campaign, deciding whether to accept a potentially controversial gift, whether to grow the size of the development operation or make commitments or shifts in what the fundraising priorities might need to be. Those are all the kinds of issues that are not instantly coming from a place of consensus. People have different opinions about those things within a chancellor's board or a president's executive team, and you have to thread that needle somewhat. And it's a very important skill to develop, and I love that everybody sort of touched on that. But I know we're getting close to the last marks here of our time, and I want to remind everybody that we'd love to answer questions if anybody in the audience has them, either by putting them in the chat room or by putting your hand up on your icon or your avatar there, so that we know you want to weigh in or have some thoughts of your own about some of these things, because everybody that's on the call, of course, has experience as well that also have valid observations. So we'll keep an eye on that, and I know Amy's helping us do that. But I'm wondering, on some of those more controversial topics, whether any of the panelists have anything to add to these comments about finding that chemistry, building that trust, and having it be an ironclad partnership.
I would
I mean,
say,
what
oh, go ahead. I was just going to say,
what I would add is that, one, Jason, I could have used your advice about 20 years ago. And it's very profound. And why didn't I not? You know, because I can remember the 1 year evaluation that I had when I was a VP of advancement, and I went into the president for some reason, gunning for, bear, and thought that I had all the right answers. And I didn't understand where he was coming from on a number of issues. And so I presented my case, and his response was, "Why do you think I hired you?" So I had, the reins, I had the opportunity of moving forward, and I didn't quite understand that. So, I think that it is that idea of being the consummate team player, of, showing alliance is really important, and being open and learning from everyone. We're talking about specifically the relationship with the chairman or the president, but I think, learning from and understanding the intent of everyone around you and trying to synthesize that into your relationship with the president is very important. So I'm sorry, Kimberly, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I think I was just going to say, so much of this is maybe just being yourself from the first moment in your interviews. It's really easy to go into interview mode and try to present
That's a great point.
Most professional side of you, which of course you always want to be the professional, but the more that you are the sincere, empathetic, passionate person that you're going to be in your job, even from the first moment in the interviews, and perhaps to the points you've made about telling them, whoever you're interviewing with, that, your goals are to be the cheerleader, be the one that has the back and the agenda of the president or CEO from the very minute, and mean it, of course, but to lay those things out right from the get-go, and then to be that person that you showed in the interview and be consistent with it. I mean, I'm sure that all of us have hired someone who looks great on paper, who did a great job in an interview, but then when they're in your culture, that person isn't there anymore. So I think all of us have certainly come to the places that we are by being true to who we are as people, and that shines through, and that can be different than your CEO. I mean, I think, that's one of the strengths probably for all of us. We're the cheerleader, we follow that agenda, we know the strategic plan, but we're still who we are as people, and that comes through. And I think in many senses, for me, you're able to develop relationships with potential donors and others in ways that are different from your CEO, which is also a strength. You're still the cheerleader, you're still on agenda, but you're developing relationships that maybe that CEO or president or other couldn't have.
Well, we need to wrap up because we said we would be here for 75 minutes. And there is one question. Do each of you report to only one president or executive or multiple? How do you balance the trust and loyalty when there are multiple leaders that you report to?
Hey, Richard, I'd take that one just very briefly if I could. Again, that was one of the, what I would call one of the quantum leaps of stepping into this role and reporting to a president and a board of trustees for the university, as well as being the chief executive for the foundation, which is a separate 501c3 with a separate board, with a separate governance policies, etc. And I would just say, if you want to step into this role, be really, really confident in your ability to build consensus and to be, as Richard put it, an ambassador. Take the foundation's agenda to the president and the trustees, take the president and trustees agenda to the foundation, and be a good solution person and build consensus around it.
Mike or Kimberly, anything to add?
That was perfect.
All right. Mike, any closing words of wisdom?
So again, thank you everyone for your time. I know I mentioned this idea of just business skills. I do want to just really re-emphasize that. The conversations I've had with our CFO this calendar year have been incredibly beneficial for both of us as she rethinks how philanthropy can be a partner for the organization. But I'm not confident I could have had these types of conversations with her if I had not had a business degree to help enhance the academic skills that I had already had.
Kimberly?
I would say lead by example, even if example means that you're willing to admit that you don't know all the answers, that, kind of tying back to what I've said already, the more that you are the real person that you are, the more strength you have in the relationships that you're developing. And I would also suggest that, not everyone needs to be the chief development officer or the vice president of advancement to do their very best work. I know that, we all are kind of put on a path to constantly change and grow. And to me, the best growth is realizing what your best strength is related to the organizations you represent. So absolutely go out and seek that job if you want to be the leader, but also be willing to say to yourself that maybe that's not the role that I want, because I could do my better work in a different place and not have to be, in charge of 7 different relationships like poor Jason is, just to get a phone call every day.
All right, Jason, any words from you, closing words from you?
Well, certainly not poor Jason. I've been very blessed in my career. I'm very grateful to be where I'm at. I guess one thing I would just hit home again for everyone is the importance of having the right people in your life, making sure that you're maintaining good boundaries between work and home, that your family's on board, that you're taking care of your responsibilities there. Make sure you can build good relationships with people, with your current employer, great relationship with the president, board members, and make sure you've got those people from previous gigs and just other connections who can speak advice and truth into your life at times that you're going to need to hear it. And the other thing I'd encourage you to do is try and find those early wins in your tenure as a chief development officer, and make sure that you can show yourself to be competent, confident, and ready to go when you step into it. Thanks very much for having me, you guys. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you on behalf of Gregory at Aspen Leadership Group and myself and my colleagues at Phoenix Philanthropy. It's been a terrific panel discussion, and we thank you all. And my final words of wisdom would be confidence in your knowledge, but be willing to learn from everyone around you, and you'll do a terrific job as you step into this role. So thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.